Under the Hood with Dimitri and Mustafa. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. We started this podcast after having numerous conversations and discussions about the economy, how certain policies impact our lives, certain decisions impact our lives, domestic, global issues, and what that means for us, not just on the short term, long term, how interest rates increase, why they increase, what's inflation, what's causing inflation to slow down, what does that really mean? All these issues in a nutshell. The main reason why we wanted to do this podcast is because we felt that there are a lot of people that have questions but won't ask questions or aren't asking the right questions. The goal of this podcast is to give everyone an opportunity to learn. This is our first podcast. We're jumping into the middle of a topic, so I apologize about that, but in the future, we will have it better prepared from the beginning. Please enjoy the rest of the podcast. Thank you.
Have a change like this where you have a recession, okay, and demand stops or slows down, you actually have a shift in that demand curve, which automatically has the impact of lowering prices. And the only way to get to that point, if that's truly what the Fed wants, which is, it's everybody can read it. The economy is going, or the economy is going to have to go into a recession. And the only way it's going to go into a recession is if the labor market softens up.
Yeah.
As long as we continue, and that's the gist of it, Mustafa. As long as we continue seeing these unemployment figures where, employment is healthy, and the economy went on a $500,000 or 500,000 a person hiring spree, you're never going to see that. You're not going to see a slowdown. So you'll continue to see rates increase until the labor markets falter. And that might be, and my prediction is we're going to be somewhere in the 10% for prime. We're at 7.75 today. That means we have 2.25 left. We know we're going to get a quarter hike this next month, which will be at 8. So we'll only be 2% off. Could we see something like inflation, rear its head again and speed up by 0.1, 0.2%, right before the Fed meets again and they end up raising, the rate 50 bips? Certainly we can. It's kind of anybody's guess. But to be in a position right now to confidently make a decision about either purchasing a home, changing jobs, making a large purchase, you cannot do that with conviction at this point or with confidence. My expectations set mid to late third quarter of last year was that the markets are going to trade in a range all of 2023, and they've been doing that. Sure, we had a little blip up in January, but look at last week. Last week was the worst week we've had in the markets in 2 months. What's next week going to be like? I can almost guarantee you we're going to see the markets continue to bleed down next week. Okay, as we approach the Fed's decision to raise rates here in a couple of weeks again. And earnings aren't looking good. So, the confidence level of the consumer right now should be neutral. We should be very cautious, right, in terms of making any major changes, lifestyle changes, purchases, because there's still too much unknown in what direction this economy is going to go. Is it going to go up? Is it going to go down? We may see a little April, May, as we all know, is good time for housing, right? Springtime housing market is always the healthiest. So, the one good thing is rates for 30-year mortgages are probably going to stay between 5.5% and 6%, whether the Fed raises or not. So, I expect in the spring season, we see some the housing market ripen up a little bit. We'll see more supply on the market. Will the prices come down a little bit? They might. But, even if you look at the December report, prices have still gone up every month. Even with a slowing housing market, prices seem to continue to move up. maybe at a slower rate than they were year over year because
Sure.
of, the economy slowed. But in terms of the housing market going into the spring, I think we're going to see that frost, we're going to see that warm up, melt some of that frost that we've seen here in the first quarter of the year. And we'll probably see a little bit of a better or healthier market. Now, how long that lasts, it's anybody's guess, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't expect much there. Expect it to just be a blip on the screen and then probably revert back to what we're seeing right now.
That this is probably with this the price increase and everything that we're seeing today may not be a short term. It may be a long term. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, China is what I mean. I don't know what their population. Do you know what their population is?
I don't know their population, but I think there was an article that said they've gotten out of poverty to where like the majority Chinese are the middle class. Like their middle class is growing in vast numbers, and their consumption is so high that um, there was an article about like 3,000 something Chinese vessels all over the world, basically I call it siphoning. Like they're basically taking all the fish from different parts of the water. I don't
Yeah.
know much about it, but I was reading about it, and it said that it's because their middle class consumption is much higher than what the Americans ever needed. So they think that will limit, we talk about scarcity, so they think that is not a good thing for the world. I don't know. I don't know much about that.
From an economic perspective, let's think a little bit about this, okay? World War II, right? What happened in World War II? Japan invaded, right? The United States.
Hmm.
They quickly realized that there was no freaking chance in hell that they would be able to defeat the United States. So what did they do? They pulled back after World War II and they built what? They built a huge economic powerhouse, right?
Hmm.
In Japan. Japan through the 50s and 60s was much like China was, in the 90s and 2000s. And now the Japanese, they produce well-made products. People have confidence in the items, the materials that they produce, and they've become an economic power. And they have been now for many years. So they learned that, after World War II, that militarily there was just no way for them to compete. If they're going to win, they've got to have a good military and a strong economy, right?
Yeah.
So now you've got the Chinese, and you were just, talking about the middle class. What has been one of the, hot buttons that we've been hearing since, basically the end of 2020, which was when COVID was super mature, is all this supply chain stuff, right?
Hmm.
Supply issues. Now, what about this? If we have we ever thought that the Chinese economy has been growing at such a tremendous rate over the course of the last 20 plus years that they have developed a true middle class.
Hmm.
And is it possible that some of those supply chain issues aren't related to COVID necessarily, but related to the tremendous amount of demand that has grown in China that's taking resources from the United States in terms of the resources that would normally be producing the million units that the United States would order now is being asked to produce 1,000,002, but we're only getting 400,000 because the Chinese need the other 800,000.
Yeah.
So is the supply chain real? Is it because of the disruption created or caused by COVID? Because I just read an article the other day that there's still major supply chain issues.
Yeah.
Or is it because the demand of the mainland Chinese citizen has increased to a level that they have now had to allocate more of their resources to producing domestic products? right? And they
Yeah.
just can't produce. So what happens to the price of products in America? They go up because most of
Yeah.
our products are from China. We are now fighting with the Chinese middle class for the same products.
Yeah.
And as we know, economics, in general is about, the study of scarce resources. Every resource on this planet is not unlimited, it's limited.
Yep.
So now you have not only China, Mustafa, but you've got India with, I think, 1.2 or 1.3 billion people whose
Sure.
economy is growing at the level and at the rate that China's was 20 years ago. Okay. And China's is still growing tremendously compared to us. I mean, we've been growing at the same rate for the last 25 years. China's growing 3, 4, 5 times faster than us, and India as well. So, do we have ultimately a longer term issue that's going to continue to rear its head, which is inflation, because of the added demand around the globe
Yeah.
as more of these large manufacturing based economies like China and India, North Africa, their citizens become start to become and enjoy the middle class lifestyle that we have in America for the last 150 years.
According to Google, China is 1.4 billion.
Yeah, what does this say for India?
I think India is about the same, about one. So China is 1.45. India is about 1.4.
Wow, so they're really close. Yeah. Well, we have heard from, about China slowing down. I think this was it last year was the
Yeah.
first year that they didn't experience much growth. We actually here in the United States have reversed because I think, we're seeing families with less children based on whatever's going on. That's a discussion for another day. But I think from an economic perspective and a world markets perspective, we must really consider the demand that's come online, both in China and in India, just over the course of the last 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, they probably have added 500 to 850 million people to the middle class, which is, 2 to 3 United States.
Yeah.
I mean, so that the demand for silver, the demand for iron, the demand for corn, the demand for all the same products, all those consumables that we enjoy each and every day, the prices have increased. So I think COVID, yeah, maybe it created some disruption, but I think also at the same time, this whole idea of inflation was set to happen. Sure, the government stimulated the economy through fiscal policy, right? Which is the federal government, choosing to create programs like PPP, right, to help businesses. But on top of it, you and I were talking about the other day what's happening now.
Yeah.
Businesses are now where the federal government's pulling the rope the other way and starting to win the tug of war, and the economy's starting to go downhill as businesses spend all their PPP, spend all their idle money, their economic, or emergency, whatever money. And now we're in a situation where we're kind of in a holding pattern until the money runs out. It's anybody's guess when the money runs out. So that's what's going to be interesting is the culmination of higher rates and business financials deteriorating, as in particular small businesses. We already know Wall Street companies financials are deteriorating, but as the small businesses run out of those funds, how are they going to continue to operate, right?
Yep.
In a world where inflation appears to be here for some time. I mean, that small business owner's got, right, input costs, all their costs of goods sold, right? That might be materials, that may be contract labor, whatever it may be, unless it's 100% service, cash-based business like, medical, healthcare, those types of businesses, a CPA, professional type businesses, they don't have necessarily those types of input costs. They'll have operating expenses that are like employees, right? We expect more money from our employers these days because we got to keep up with the increase in prices.
Yeah,
But I think our whole interpretation of inflation right now, we got to look outside of the box. This is a global economy. International trade is such a significant portion of our domestic product that, China moving to more of a middle class, and India is going to have a huge impact on global resources and
sure.
energy prices. I'm actually surprised at what are we at oil? What's oil right now per barrel?
Um,
77, $80, something like that. I'm not really sure, but I'm actually even surprised that the barrel of oil has dropped to where it is. I don't know if you saw Mustafa this week, but Russia said they're cutting their production by I think 500,000 barrels, and I believe the markets, the speculative petroleum market acted on that quite quickly, maybe a Thursday or Friday, and the barrel went up a little bit,
it's
but
about
you know
80 per barrel.
80, yeah. Okay. So I
Yeah,
think last time I saw was about 77, up a few bucks, but we've seen fuel prices go down. So yeah, that will probably, I think that it will settle somewhere and then start going back up because we've
yeah,
got resource issues, man. We don't have enough resources
yeah.
right now.
They're. You were talking about China's as far as the middle class. There was an article going back to the vessels. I think I mentioned it to you if you haven't seen it, or actually I may have sent it to you. And I think it was Ecuador. So what they were doing is like every country pretty much has like a boundary of where they can fish and how far out they can go. So China just happened to park their boats like not China per se, the government, but the fishing business. They were
Yeah.
parking their boats right outside that boundary and fishing in that particular area in Ecuador, one of the countries, were complaining about it because they said, "Hey, you guys are basically tapping into our market." And
Yeah.
not only were they tapping into it, but these boats weren't moving. It's almost like you like an encampment where they just stay there and they just fish, 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 and then the big vessel comes, and the big vessel basically takes all the fish and whatever people that were tired and on, they'll take those workforce and then bring in recruits, like fresh recruits, and then they start working the water and catching fish. So I thought that was very interesting, and I don't know how much of that was maybe bias and not true, and how much of it was true, but they said it was about 3,000 vessels or ships, and most of them are basically parked, to just keep doing this on a day-to-day basis. And the whole reason is because China's depleted their resources
I
near their
mean,
waters.
24/7.
Yeah.
They're probably working 24/7 out there. I mean, think of what it takes to feed 1,000,000,004 people. I mean, we're overwhelming the planet. I mean,
Hmm.
if we don't realize that, but I think I've shared with you, I mean, man has this fear of dying. And it seems like, from the moment we're born, and it's kind of natural for animals, right? I mean, the animal's primary objective is to stay alive. And us as humans, we've obviously not only have that same built-in, what do you call it? That built-in desire to live, but we also have the ability as a intelligent animal to create technology that allows us to live way beyond our
Hmm.
natural lifespan. That, in 1900, people lived until 35 years old and they died. That was the average lifespan. We're talking 123 years ago only. 35 years old, you were dead, the average person. Now we're living more than double that in terms of our life expectancy. And what does that mean? That means more people alive on the planet at once, and we're depleting the resources at a faster pace, whether that's cutting down the forest, whether that's polluting the waters, whether that's mining for gold, whatever it may be. eating chickens, farming. I mean, the demand that we're putting on planet Earth to sustain the population of what are we at now, 8 billion people? I mean, how long can the planet continue to sustain us? And at
Mhm.
what level, when we get to 10 billion, what's that magic number where we've run out of room, we've run out of resources, and at that point we start fighting with each other maybe.
Yeah.
But we obviously are overwhelming the planet. I mean, just your story right now about the Chinese, setting up in international waters outside of some of these South American nations to proliferate their fishing activities because they have 1.4 billion they've got to feed. What happens when it runs out? What happens when all the fish runs out? I mean,
Yeah.
is it, I mean, we don't think that it's a real issue. It seems like human beings don't seem to believe anything until all of a sudden they go to order a fish and they say there's no more fish left. And then at that point it's too darn late, right? You
Yeah.
can't
Disconnected.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't, we don't want to realize it, and when we do realize it, it's often too late. I mean, even, from a resource perspective or from a market perspective, what I've noticed that's been interesting this last year is every time the market goes up, all the natural resources go up that day too.
Oh
Why?
wow.
Because what's happening is they're thinking, well, man, if the economy's improving, there's going to be a demand for gold, there's going to be a demand for all these products, and they're going to go up in price. And that has been very counterintuitive because typically, when the equity markets are doing really well, people are moving out of metals, people are moving out of orange juice and wheat. They're moving into the equity markets, into the securities
Hmm.
to take advantage of the returns there. But I think, because inflation is such a hot topic and hot button, and I think people are realizing that it's here to stay for some time, that as if the economy is going to improve, Wall Street to me believes that if the economy improves or starts to grow, we're going to see inflation creep in once again extremely quickly. And that's
Hmm.
kind of what the Fed's trying to do now. And everybody's saying, well, you got to slow the interest rate hikes. Well, not really. I mean, look at what happened this last week, Mustafa, or 2 weeks ago when they raised rates. What is it, 3 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago when they raised rate a quarter point, right? The Fed comes out shortly after and says, we think we're containing inflation. What do you think happens? Markets go up,
Yep.
exuberance, excitement. Everything is cured. Well, this is exactly counterintuitive to what we want because when people get comfortable like that and confidence begins to bleed back into the economy, people start spending money. And when people start spending money, that means there's a return to inflation, especially at the unemployment rate we're currently sitting at. And we can't have that. And that's why we'll continue. There may even be rate hikes all the way until December of this year. Who knows?
Y-
But it certainly isn't going to end in March. It's not going to end in April. It's not going to end in June.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, it's very easy to see, very apparent. And I think the markets know it. We got to follow the markets. The markets are made up of all these, tens of millions of people. And when you put all those minds together, they usually get it right. It's just like a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
They have people betting on the Super Bowl tomorrow. There's a line. I don't know, what the line is. Maybe it's 2.5, Kansas City or something. But when you've got so many people betting on the game, the outcome typically is what, is expected. So, I think that's the same thing with the markets. You got to remember in housing, in credit, whatever it may be, where there's a business that's built around it, you're going to have sales, you're going to have business development folks that are always going to push the envelope, right? And make it appear that this is a great time to purchase, to act, to whatever it may be that they want you to do so they can improve their, income. But you got to be very careful. I mean, listen, if you need to buy a house now, go buy it. But if you don't need one and you don't need to move, why do you need to move when there's this much instability?
Yeah.
When there's much, when we don't have the clarity that we would when the economy is normal, right? We're not living in a normal time right now. And I think if you ask every CEO right now on Wall Street, they're going to tell you that a recession is inevitable. It's just when. When is it going to show up? Is it going to show up next quarter? Is it going to show up at the end of the year? That's anybody's guess. But I believe I saw something that says 77% of CEOs believe that there's going to be a recession. So, just like the betting market that we discussed, it's probably going to be pretty accurate, and we will most likely have a recession.
Yeah.
So, and hey, when you look at a business cycle, that's how it is. We all know the business cycle. Economy rips, it slows down, it comes down, and then it resumes its course, ripping back up and doing the same thing. And business cycles are pretty programmed. They happen every so many years. We had a pretty bad recession back in 2009. So it's taken a little bit longer to recover from that, because typically these business cycles happen between 6 and 8 years. So we're going on a little bit longer than that. But we also had a major disruptive event, right, with COVID and with all the money that was input into the economy. So that also changed things. Otherwise, we probably would have had a recession in 2020. But now we've been able to keep it at bay for a few additional years.
I think it was like 2019. We were going to make a move, and my wife was saying you need to buy a house, and I said, get an investment. I said, I think the market is going to go down. I don't know what I was basing it off of, but I said 2020 looks like it's the year, because a lot of people were talking, and there's been CEOs exiting companies, and then eventually what ended up happening was 2020 COVID happened, money got flushed into the economy. Things were getting, right when I pulled money out, things started improving, and I was basically the sucker that got in a little late, got back into the market a little late, and it kept going like that until 2021, end of 2021, or no, 2022. And then right around the time you and I connected again is when I basically parked and said I won't make any moves, and start seeing things just kind of go down. But it looked like it took the market 2 years to really show its color. And
you're right. I mean, you have such tremendous federal stimulus with all those. I mean, not even just PPP and all the small business stuff, but even the stimulus that was administered at the state level, right, at the local level, whether that was like employee retention type grants that small businesses were receiving, but also all the grants and stimulus that the individuals were receiving from local government. So you've got that paired with what's going on in the small business world. And I mean, it's like dropping a bag of $100 billion in the middle of the country, and everybody rushing to get it. And what do when they've grabbed 100,000 of it? They go out and they spend it, right? They go buy things. I mean, look at the auto market, the used and new car markets, right? They were going crazy
insane,
up until a month. So big ticket items like that. What happened in the housing market? I mean, we see houses that sold for 220,000 in 2019, and they want 640 today. And they may have made some improvements, but that's how much the housing market appreciated in several geographic areas of this country. West Coast, down in the South, the Southwest, Texas, Arizona, obviously California. I mean, saw big booms to real estate. So Now we're reaping or we're sowing or we're on the other side, right? We're on the other side of things now where the government's got to reel that spending in. They got to slow things down. And that's why these unnatural, stimuluses, or when government intervenes and stimulates the economy, they typically do not, they've got a great effect and everyone's happy up front, but it's kind of like taking a drug, right? You're high, you're excited, and then you've got that downside where you're tired and you want to fall asleep, and it's all over and you feel sick, right? Like drinking alcohol. You drink, you're happy with your friends, you're laughing, and then before you know it, you've had one too many, like we did with our stimulus, and what happens? You have a headache, you can't wake up in the morning, and you're paying the price. And that's what we're doing now, is we're beginning to see some of the challenges that those stimuluses created for the economy now on the backside. So, we're just in the infinite stages. I think, like I've shared with you, Mustafa, 13 is going to be, for the markets, we're going to just see a trade within, or range trades all the way, from the beginning all the way to December. The market's pretty much range bound. I don't think we're going to see a lot of movement, a lot of change this year. And also, on the technology front, which has pretty much driven our economy over the last 30 years, I don't know what's coming up, what's new, what's going to be the next Facebook, what's going to be the next Uber, what's going to be the next Tesla, right? I don't know what it's going to be. Maybe it comes in the form of agriculture. Maybe it comes in the form of synthetic materials. Maybe it comes, we did see fake food, right? I call it science food, with Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger and those types of companies, coming into the foyer and becoming, something that the environmentalists are jumping on, but they're failing. Impossible Burger or Meat and Beyond. I mean, those companies are failing right now. They're doing extremely poorly. So, is it a fad? Probably. But what's the next best thing? What do you think it is, Mustafa? What do you think the next technological advance is that's on the horizon that's gonna change things?
No idea right now.
Yeah, I mean, when you study economic history, which I did for many years, economic history, the when you think of just regular, everyday world history or American history, when you put out the timeline, let's say America, right, 200 and what are we now, 1870, 200, let's just say 250 years
Mm-hmm.
since this country became independent. When you think of all the historical events that have taken place, you think World War One, World War Two, the Revolution, Industrial Revolution. You think of, the 60s, the 70s, the space shuttle, whatever it may be. There are certain events, certain things that took place that define what we are as a nation. When you take economic history, what you're looking at is you're looking at innovation, because innovation is what is creating the economic boom or the economic change, either to that community or to the world. So, when you look back, you say, okay, well, the initial humans settled near, streams of water. Why? Because that's where they farmed. They had water. They had access to it. What's the next development after that? It would be something like crop rotation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Double two crop rotation, where, you rotate crops every year so the soil could regain its nutrients, right? And your yield goes up because of that. So, that was a huge boom. What did that mean? That meant more people could survive. The more
Yeah.
food you have, the more people can be sustained. So, you saw a significant growth in the population. Then you go to a three crop rotation, right? Which is even a more advanced technology. We look at that and we don't really relate technology to it, but it is. It's a technological change. Even significant things like the wheel, those had a huge
Sure.
boom in the
Yeah.
economy. I mean, they changed the way how effective and efficient we were at transporting products, right? Before, they were transporting by a mule or a donkey or a horse. and you could only, a horse can only carry so much. Well, now you've got a wagon with wheels that roll really well. You attach it to a couple horses. Now you can carry, maybe 50 bales of hay, 10 miles away.
Mm.
So it allowed people to expand, allowed them to grow things in areas that they couldn't before, things like that. So, when you look at economic history, those are the milestones that are, when you look at a timeline, those are the things: crop rotation, three crop rotation, the wheel, and you continue throughout history, and all of those inventions, those technological advanced inventions, that's what brings us to the next level.
Hmm.
So now we're faced with that again, right? Over the last 10 years, what has it been? In 2006, 7, the cell phone became commonplace,
Yeah.
right? The iPhone,
Yep.
I think, came out in '06, but the cell phone really became commonplace, where it did have its roots in the mid '80s, but didn't become, commonplace and adopted by the majority until the mid 2000, 2006, 7, 8, whatever year it was. And then you had all this social media, right? Which, what did that do? That changed marketing, that changed the face of advertising, that allowed people and small businesses and businesses in general to touch people more frequently, more often, and all the mathematics that go on behind the scene that allow these companies to target us much more effectively,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Target as individuals versus as an audience, right? TV is, hey, here's this, but when you go on social media, based on your activity, they're targeting me with a bicycle because
Yeah.
they can tell that I like bikes. So that was a pretty significant innovation and change, for business. So, what's the next thing? I don't
Yeah.
know.
I
I
think
mean,
you were talking about technology. I think the craziest thing, just experiencing technology from like my dad's perspective. We moved here in the '90s from Pakistan, so my family moved to Afghanistan, and we moved here. And my dad hadn't seen his mom, my grandma, for almost 20 years. And the way they would communicate is by phone, and they didn't have phone over there. So what they had was the neighbor's phone. The neighbor would have a phone line who happened to somehow get a line into their house, and then some of the other neighbors would go into their home and use the line to call their families. Or you would have to go like to a public place. It was a booth that you go, a office you go into, and they have a bunch of booths that you would rent and then go in there and call your son or your loved one. So my grandma had to do one or the other, and my uncle lived out there too. But I remember my dad could never see her, and they would constantly talk by phone, and it was kind of difficult because I would hear them screaming, like because sometimes the phone line doesn't pick up your voice, so he would get loud, "Hello, hello, can you hear me?" But when technology got to the point where my dad can get on Skype and FaceTime or webcam with my grandma, the two of them were looking at each other like, how you watch these movies where what is a movie that just came out? The blue guy, Avatar, where he's
Target.
like in a different environment and then he's experiencing these animals and they're just not sure about one another. My grandma's just looking at the camera. She can't believe it. My dad is looking at it. They can't believe it. And all of a sudden they just start getting teary eyed, and that's when I knew. I was like, wow, you're my dad. Like they're experiencing like some sort of moment where they're face to face, but they're not. But they're very close. So that was very interesting, and I knew like now that I look at it, like the internet made the world smaller.
Oh
You
yeah.
news travels fast. You do something here, it's already in the other side of the world. Everyone knows it.
There were some social media companies in the infancy at the beginning that are either no longer around, right?
Hmm.
Or were purchased by or acquired by some of the current ones that are household names today. But I think there were some social media type platforms, obviously not, as advanced as the ones today, but there was something that had come out before, the big ones that we all know now.
Like
That
MySpace, Facebook.
Yeah, there were precursors to this whole thing. So, that's what I oftentimes will look for is, what are the precursors? Are we seeing anything new that, could develop into something significant? Because that's how you make money, right? That's how you make money in the markets. It's all about trends. It's all about realizing and identifying those trends, the next best thing. What is everybody buying? What are people looking at? What's the next, technology that someone's going to be forced to invest in? I mean, the reason why any of these technologies become commonplace is because you get to a critical mass where everybody has to have one. I mean, and now, like you were talking about landlines in the household, even though there are landlines in many households, most households now have abandoned having a phone at home, right? They don't have service. They don't. So, you're pretty much relying on a cell phone. I mean, it's the only way the only replacement for a phone for the most part when you're on the go and around. And that's what happens with all these technologies. And mostly it comes out of businesses, right? Because if once one business adapts to that new technology, their competition is forced to. Because having a cell phone, let's say in your business, allows your sales folks, allows your team to be connected to very quickly, right? They don't have to be in the office. It could be on a Saturday, right? You can be connected with your customers at any given time. So
Yeah.
that connectivity is an advantage. So once one company adopts that, the other companies are forced to. You go to lunch now, Mustafa, at work, and if a customer calls you, you might pick up the phone.
Yeah.
Where, back 25 years ago, once you went to lunch, customer could call you, they'd leave you a voicemail, but you certainly aren't able to connect with them during your lunch period.
Yeah.
But once your competition can connect to that customer during lunch, that means they've got an advantage. They've got a competitive advantage, and you, as their competitor, can no longer, you know, keep yourself from not adopting that technology.
Yeah.
You're forced to adopt it. And that's how most of these technologies become a part of our lives, is because of the money, the monetary type ramifications to businesses. That's how, in order, when you think of the customer, right? The customer wants to get to be heard when it wants to. And as you know, not only are things moving faster, but our expectations as individuals has become we've gone from a time where we used to hear immediate gratification, and now there is no question about that. Everybody wants immediate responsiveness,
Yeah.
whether that, because a product of yours, a product broke and you need to get a hold of the manufacturer, or you need to get a hold of, your banker on a Saturday, whatever it may be, or your real estate agent. Our expectations are now heightened because of the technological capabilities we have.
Yeah.
So what the next step is someone out there that can really develop a product or service that can elevate that to the next level. Where, let's say you've got a screen built into your eye where when someone emails you, texts you, calls you, it's right in front of you, front and center, and you have to respond to it. Because I remember back in the day when we had blackberries, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and what I hated about it is that darn thing would sit on my nightstand and the little red light would blink, and man, I got to get it. Who wants me? What do they need? And also the human animal likes to feel important, doesn't it? So
Sure.
when we see that, that red light, we're like, oh, someone needs me. Become self-important. Like, yeah, we think that we're so important, but really we're not. But someone does need me. So, that's where technology to me goes, is it follows the money. How can it make us more efficient? How can it make us more money? When the next technology is developed that can do that,
Yeah.
and it's significant enough, that will be, our next step to additional growth, as an economy. Otherwise, we may lay stagnant for a number of years.